really don't deserve this kind of attention. People like me are grunts in political campaigns. We work in the background, but to the extent that this might be appropriate, the real credit goes first to the great Democratic candidates in whose campaigns I have worked over the years. People like Don Siegelman, like Paul Hubbard, like Bill Baxley and Doug Jones, make it very easy to be an enthusiastic worker in the trenches of their campaigns and to be enthusiastic to stand out in the rain for a human billboard with 100 fellow campaign workers holding a yard sign supporting somebody you can believe in. We've been very fortunate in that regard, and we've got a good slate of candidates this year as well. Second, I'm lucky because my wife Susan has been there urging me on. Susan is a true believer, a true political junkie, and she has great political instincts. Everything I ever did to help a candidate in politics had to have the advice and consent of Susan. She's worked every bit as hard as I did. Every man needs a strong partner beside him. Thank you, sir. Third, I'm also lucky because I had the support of my long-suffering law partners. Every one of them, and there have been approximately 40 over the years, have been Democrats. We have had rigorous screening criteria. First, you had to support trade unionism. Second, you had to be a Democrat. And third, you had to be very, very smart. My partners were very tolerant of the time that I spent working on political campaigns, and many of them did the same thing. There are 3 here tonight. You've met Vance, and I think you met Mary too. He mentioned Mary. My former law partner, Kim Walker, couldn't be here, but I really am appreciative of her support for this event. A former law partner, Mike Hamilton, is here, and I'm glad that he has been brave enough to manage the drive from National. I feel like I should include another lawyer who is here tonight as a partner, Theron Stokes, as Associate Executive Director of AEA. He runs the legal program of AEA. Theron and I have worked very closely together since Dr. Hubbard hired me as outside corporate legal counsel for AEA almost 30 years ago. I feel like James Anderson ought to be a member of our firm. We have worked so closely over 20 or 30, I don't know, James, 30 years perhaps. That's right. But it's been such a pleasure to work with such talented people over the years. Now I want to tell you a story about my background as a Democrat and how I came to be one. First, I learned early on that my parents had always been active FDR New Deal Democrats. My father came to Selma, where I'm from, in the 30s after working as a coal miner in the Colorado coal fields and for the Mine Workers Union. He came to Selma with the financial backing of an uncle, not based on the money that he earned as a coal miner, of course, or as a worker, as an organizer for the Mine Workers Union. And in those years, there was no other political party in the South, but even later, when it became clear that some Southerners who called themselves Democrats really were Dixiecrats, my mama remained an FDR Democrat. My parents were divorced during the war, and my father died at a fairly early age soon after. Mama remained politically active. She was another strong woman in my life. Now let me explain what being politically active meant to Mama. In 1945, Mama had been president of her garden club in Selma for perhaps 6 months or so when she ran for state president of the garden clubs of Alabama. She got elected. Well, since Mama was a divorced single mother at the time, she would carry my younger sister and me with her when she would go out to visit member clubs all over the state. On these trips, I began to notice how all of the local officers she would visit had beautiful plantings at their homes. We had a nice house in Selma. The grass was cut. That was about it. Nothing like what these ladies had. One time I asked her, I was about 7 years old, said, Mama, you're president of the state garden clubs. Why don't we have pretty flowers around our house? Like these folks. Mama thought for a minute and then kneeled down by me on the sidewalk to some lady's house and whispered, little Cecil. My father was Big Cecil. I was little Cecil almost till the day she died. Little Cece, don't you ever repeat this. I love flowers. I loved it when your daddy would give me flowers, but I don't know anything about growing flowers. And I don't want to. I ran for president so I could invite Big Jim Folsom to speak at a statewide convention. Garden clubs of Alabama would attract 2,000 delegates to the statewide convention. She was a fan of Big Jim. Soon after Folsom took office in '47, he appointed Mama to fill an unexpired term of tax assessor in Dallas County. When the term expired, people would ask Mama if she was going to run for the job. She said, no, I've got too much Folsom dust on my shoes. And you probably know what that means. She agreed with Big Jim that the poll tax was evil. She applauded when Big Jim invited Adam Clayton Powell, a black New York congressman, to the governor's mansion. And she agreed with Big Jim when he said, quote, Negroes constitute 35% of our population. Are they getting 35% of the fair share of living? Are they getting adequate medical care to rid themselves of hookworm, rickets, and social diseases? There's been too much stirring of old hatred and prejudices and false alarms. The best way in the world to break this down is to lend our ears to the teachings of Christianity and the ways of democracy. End of quote. Those are not positions which would get you elected in Selma in the Jim Crow days of the early positions, but my mother supported them vocally and enthusiastically. They do reflect the thinking of a true populist. They're diametrically different than the pseudo-populists now in the White House. In the church that I attend, we have a form of prayer called a collect. These are prayers that are used in our liturgy every Sunday. We have lots of collects, over 100 pages of them, in fact. We have traditional collects and contemporary collects. Don't be fooled by the term contemporary. A contemporary collect might be 100 years old, and our traditional collects go back 500 years. Now, we've got a nerdy retired priest at All Saints Church. She preached last Sunday in the absence of our regular priest, Jim Flowers. Her name is Reverend Mary Robert. She's here, so is Jim tonight. We ordain women, of course. We also ordain gays. And we even have a black presiding bishop. This is not your father's Episcopal Church. Most of us, I suspect, are Democrats. I know for a fact that many of those in the All Saints parish, my parish, are in any event. Mary's given me permission to share parts of her sermon with you from last week. I got her permission since it seemed especially appropriate these days. The theme of Mary's sermon was based on an ancient collect which was written by a fellow named Stephen Shakespeare, or a relative, I understand, of Bill Shakespeare. Mary said she had not seen this collect until the week before when Jim included it in the liturgy. Not unusual that a priest had not seen a particular collect. As I said, we got a lot of them. The one that Mary chose as the theme of her sermon last Sunday goes like this. God of welcome, your people are called to be distinct, not by width of separation, but by depth of hospitality and peace within our lives. Root out our resentment and free us to welcome all who work for life and liberation, whatever path they tread. And let me observe parenthetically, if Mary had stopped there, most Republicans would have said, yeah, I guess that's right, I agree with that. But she didn't. She persisted. That's what an uppity woman does. Here's what she said, and this is quoted. The God of welcome calls us, God's people, to show how we are different because we offer hospitality and peace to all those who work for the life and liberation of everyone, no matter where they're from, what color they are, what religion, if any, they profess, or who they love. Since we're made in the image and likeness of God, and God is a God of welcome, then we are to embody traits of welcome as well. To offer hospitality is to welcome the stranger, to care for the widow and orphan, to feed the hungry, to care for the poor, to clothe the naked, to care for the sick, to visit those in prison, to offer safety to all those who are in danger. We are to offer peace. We ask for God to root out our resentment, dig it up, and throw it on the fire so that it cannot take root elsewhere. And we ask God to make us able to welcome those who are working for life and freedom, but who do it differently than we do. We Democrats believe, as Big Jim did, that these fundamental principles extend to our public life and our political responsibilities. But we say things like that, we're called socialists or communists. When they do that, we must remind our evangelical Republican friends that these commandments come right out of the books of Matthew, Isaiah, James, Deuteronomy, and Proverbs. Now, it's obvious that hospitality in the theological sense is a lot different than hospitality in the Holiday Inn sense, or even in the sense of the hospitality you offer your social friends when they come to your home for dinner. But hospitality still has a lot in common with our thinking as Democrats. In her sermon, Mary did not appeal to us as Democrats. She never even used the word, but she had a lot to say about our failures as a society to live up to these responsibilities as people of God. In our treatment of immigrants, the poor, women, people of color, people who love differently than television's Ozzie and Harry. But the message is clear to me, and I challenge you to find any hospitality in the actions of the current Republican administration. It's hopeful about the midterms, and maybe we'll see something different, please. Finally, let me say this. There was a time when I was a young lawyer that I thought that most social problems could be solved through legal process. That's why many in my generation went to law school, and that's partly the reason that I did. Those days were the days of the Warren Court. Please, Lord, bring it back. Well, I was probably wrong then. That is, that we could solve all our problems as lawyers through the legal process, but it is certainly wrong now to expect that, especially with the way the court is constituted today. I'm reminded of a quote by one of my hero activists who is no longer with us. His name was Howard Zinn. After John Roberts went on the court, Howard said, "It would be naive to depend on the Supreme Court to defend the rights of poor people, women, people of color, and dissenters of all kinds. These rights only come alive when citizens organize, protest, demonstrate, strike, boycott, rebel, and violate the law in order to uphold justice." Of course, Howard was talking about civil disobedience. Also read MLK's letter from the Birmingham jail. Martin Luther King was writing to a bunch of white ministers, including the Episcopal Bishop of Alabama, and he was answering their prayerful request to go slow with all this civil disobedience stuff. King said, "We can't do that." Selma's Montgomery March soon followed, and the Voting Rights Act followed close on the heels of that. Howard Zinn was right, and Martin Luther King was right. If you think about the last 100 years of American history, social change that you and I would praise came about after social pressure, forced change, even change that eventually ended in good legal decisions. Still true today. Old rich white men ain't gonna be hospitable. They ain't gonna give anything up until they have to. So from an old lawyer whose race has been run, here's my advice. Organize, register voters, actively support good Democrats, and vocally support them. Give them money, because they can't run political races without the mother's milk of politics. They don't have the money to compete otherwise. Remember where you came from. Resist, resist, resist. For God's sake. By the way, there's another Women's March in Washington in January. Susan's taking me up there, and I'm going. Please join the mob with us. Thank you.